In the heart of New York City, Lucas Reed is a celebrated musician known for selling out concert halls. But inside, he's haunted. 7 years ago, the two people who gave his life meaning vanished overnight. His partner Mia and their baby girl Lily disappeared without explanation. A simple note said, "Don't look for me." And he didn't. Until one night, on a quiet street corner, he sees a young girl with eyes he's never forgotten and a necklace that stops his heart cold. Who is she? Where has she been? And what truth has been buried beneath years of silence, lies, and betrayal? As Lucas digs deeper, he discovers that the villain wasn't time. It was someone much closer to home. Don't miss this gripping story of heartbreak, rediscovery, and a father's fight for truth. Subscribe now for more powerful, emotionally charged stories that stay with you long after the final note. David Carter didn't flinch when the car behind him blared its horn. He didn't register the blinking green light or the irritated shouts from a cyclist weaving around the traffic. His eyes, bloodshot from another sleepless night, stayed glued to the rearview mirror, watching his daughter, Lily, motionless in her car seat. She wasn't asleep. She wasn't distracted. She was simply silent. Again. 7 weeks. That's how long it had been since his daughter, his vibrant, giggly, melody-loving 7-year-old, had uttered a single word. He'd tried everything. Specialists at Emory, experimental consultations at the Mayo Clinic, language pathologists, therapists, speech neurologists, all of them brilliant, all of them baffled. No trauma we can pinpoint, they'd said. No neurological damage. Perhaps psychological withdrawal, but the cause is unclear. David, a man who built a tech empire from scratch with algorithms and logic, was now facing something he couldn't compute, code, or command. "Lily," he said softly, stealing another glance back. "We're going to the park today. Piedmont. You always loved the turtles there, remember?" She blinked once. No nod, no smile. Her small fingers clutched the corner of the blanket she always carried. It was the only thing she seemed to respond to anymore. He reached over, gently, touching her hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. "Okay," he whispered, voice breaking as he turned back toward the road. They arrived mid-morning. The late spring air was heavy with the scent of honeysuckle and fresh earth. Families strolled with strollers, dogs barked, joggers passed. The world kept spinning, loudly, as if Lily's silence wasn't somehow breaking it in half. David found a bench by the duck pond and sat, pulling Lily gently beside him. She stared ahead, her legs tucked under her as she leaned into her blanket. He exhaled deeply and tried to remind himself this was progress. A week ago, she wouldn't even leave the house. Today, at least, she'd walked, sat, breathed beside him. That had to count for something. A distant laugh broke the air. David looked across the lawn and spotted 3 boys, no older than 10, racing barefoot through the grass. They weren't dressed like the other kids. No brand-name sneakers, no fancy bikes or gadgets. Just worn-out jeans, sun-faded shirts, and hand-me-down energy. They tackled each other near a shaded tree, laughing breathlessly as one fell and rolled dramatically. Lily stirred. David's breath caught. Her head turned slightly. Not much, but enough. The boys seemed to sense the eyes on them. The tallest, with a mop of dark curls, straightened and made eye contact. He gave a small nod, respectful but not shy. Then, without a word, he ambled toward them, his 2 brothers trailing behind. David's instincts flared. What were they doing? What did they want? "Hey," the oldest said casually, nodding toward Lily. "Mind if we sit here a sec?" David narrowed his eyes. "Why?" "She looks sad," the middle boy said quietly. He was shorter, sandy-haired, with wide, observant eyes. We don't bother sad kids. We just, you know, talk. David hesitated. His protective walls, honed over years in corporate boardrooms, flared. But then, Lily blinked and shifted, not away from the boys, but toward them. Fine, he muttered, but no roughhousing. The boys nodded and flopped down nearby, giving Lily space. She peeked from behind her blanket, watching them curiously. I'm Ethan, the oldest said, leaning back on his elbows. That's Logan, and the little guy's Caleb. Caleb, barely 5, grinned. You want to see something funny? He crossed his eyes and stuck out his tongue. Logan snorted. Ethan rolled his eyes, but even David cracked a faint, involuntary smile. Then, so quiet it could have been imagined, Lily made a noise. A sound. Barely audible. A hum? A tiny echo? David froze. Ethan noticed too. She liked that, huh? She hasn't spoken in weeks, David said hoarsely, more to himself than them. Maybe she doesn't need talking. Maybe she just needs laughing, Caleb said matter-of-factly, then launched into giggle-filled impression of a waddling duck. Lily's lips twitched. David blinked back sudden tears, pretending it was just the wind. The boys didn't try to pry. They didn't ask why she wasn't speaking. They just kept playing, drawing quiet smiles from Lily with each silly face, each whisper-soft joke. And for a moment, a brief, beautiful moment, David felt something stir in him he hadn't dared feel in months. Hope. And in the back of his mind, something shifted. Something needed to shift. Because whatever miracle had just begun on this park bench with 3 scrappy kids and a silent girl, he wasn't going to let it fade. Not again. David couldn't shake the moment. All the way back to the Carter estate, as the sun dipped behind Atlanta's skyline and the hush of twilight settled over Peachtree, he kept hearing that almost sound from Lily. Barely a note. A flicker of voice that rose, then vanished. But it was something. In his line of work, mergers, buyouts, numbers, almost didn't count. But in fatherhood, in heartbreak, it meant everything. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She clutched her blanket again, her gaze distant. But the stiffness in her shoulders had eased, ever so slightly. It was like something had cracked, a whisper of warmth in the freeze. Inside the house, the staff knew to stay quiet. The mansion was beautiful, echoing with wealth and architectural elegance. But lately, it had felt more like a museum of what used to be, of who Lily used to be. David carried her backpack upstairs and paused outside her bedroom. You want the door open or closed tonight? He asked gently. Lily didn't answer, but as he set the backpack down and turned to leave, he noticed her staring out the window toward the dark, toward something only she could see. Downstairs, David poured himself a drink he wouldn't finish and sat at the piano. He hadn't played in years, not since his ex-wife Rachel had left. Not since their dreams of music rooms and bedtime lullabies had given way to co-parenting schedules and unsigned custody filings. But tonight, with the fireplace casting flickers against the marble, he pressed the first key. Soft, minor, a melody full of ache. His phone buzzed. Tom, his driver, left a voicemail instead of texting. David picked it up with a frown and hit play. Sir, Tom's gravelly voice said, I looked into those boys. I figured you'd want to know. David sat up straighter, listening intently. Their names check out. Ethan, Logan, Caleb Green. Live with their grandmother, Betty Green, in Decatur. Single-story duplex. Not a lot of income. No records of trouble, but they're struggling. Thought you should know. David leaned back, tapping the glass against his knee. Struggling. That word again. He'd heard it so often from therapists and school administrators and reporters who'd dissected his divorce. Now it belonged to 3 boys who made his daughter smile for the first time in weeks. The next morning, he canceled 2 investor meetings and had Tom drive him to Decatur. They pulled up to a modest home tucked between a church and a crumbling corner store. The paint was peeling. A rusted mailbox tilted sideways. But there were toys in the yard, a chalk drawing on the pavement, a wind chime made of soda cans and string. The front door opened before he knocked. "Mr. Carter," the woman said, arms folded. Late 60s, eyes sharp with suspicion. "My grandson said a man yelled at them yesterday. I take it that was you?" David winced. Yes, it was me. But I owe them an apology, and more than that." She stepped out slowly, arms crossed tighter. "What does a billionaire tech executive want with my grandsons?" "Your boys," David started, faltering. He ran a hand through his neatly trimmed hair, suddenly feeling ridiculous in his tailored blazer. "They helped my daughter yesterday, Lily. She hasn't spoken in weeks, and when she saw them, something changed. Just a little." Betty didn't blink. "And now you think they're miracle workers?" "No," David said quickly. "I think they're kind. I think they're what she needs. And if there's any way they could spend more time with her, I'd be willing to compensate." "Stop right there." Her voice snapped like a switchblade. "I don't sell my grandson's time like it's part of a business deal." David swallowed hard, shame creeping in. "I didn't mean it like that. I don't know how to help her anymore." Betty studied him a moment longer. Then her expression softened, just a little. "Maybe start by asking instead of offering. You're not the only one who's lost something, Mr. Carter." He looked down at his shoes. "Can I ask then?" She nodded. "Ask the boys. If they're willing, I'll drive them over this weekend. No promises." David exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Ms. Green." "Betty," she corrected. Then she smiled, just slightly. "And you'd better have snacks. Caleb turns into a bear when he's hungry." That Saturday, David stood awkwardly by the foyer as Tom opened the door. 3 boys stepped into the marble entrance like they'd wandered into a museum. "Whoa," Logan whispered. "Is that a robot vacuum?" David knelt to their level. "Thanks for coming." Ethan shrugged. "Lily's cool. We like her." A moment later, Lily peeked around the staircase. When Caleb spotted her, he raised a hand and waved. And Lily stepped forward. Just 1 step. But David felt it deep in his chest. Like music. Like hope. Like a heartbeat restarting. And everything else could wait. The boys didn't seem fazed by the mansion's grandeur. Ethan admired the vaulted ceilings with a quiet curiosity. Logan tapped softly on the edge of a marble banister to test its echo, and Caleb, smallest, roundest, and most curious, looked straight at Lily and gave a tiny wave. Lily, still standing just off the bottom step, gripped the banister. Her feet were bare. Her blue dress hung loose on her frame, but her eyes, David hadn't seen that kind of light in them for weeks. She looked at Caleb's hand and then up at his face. Then, like a slow thaw, she lifted her own hand and waved back. David nearly staggered. Betty watched the exchange silently from the doorway. She'd come inside only after the boys ran ahead, her heels clicking on the pristine floor with hesitant defiance. "Where should I wait?" she asked. David gestured toward the sitting room. "Wherever you're comfortable." She nodded once and followed, her eyes scanning every detail like she didn't trust the beauty of the place, like she expected a catch. Upstairs, Lily led Caleb wordlessly to her room. She didn't say a word, of course not, but she left the door open behind her. That alone was a miracle. David stood awkwardly at the top of the stairs as Logan and Ethan looked around. "You guys want anything to drink?" he asked, unsure how to speak to children anymore. "Do you have Sprite?" Logan asked hopefully. David blinked. "Sprite?" He turned to Tom, who was standing just outside the hallway. "Do we have Sprite?" "I'll check the kitchen, sir," Tom said smoothly. Ethan tugged on his sleeve. "Where's Lily's room?" David motioned toward the hallway. "Down there, first door on the right." The two boys sprinted off, their laughter echoing through the high halls. Inside the room, something extraordinary was happening. Caleb had taken a small wooden block from a basket in the corner. He held it up to Lily, grinned, and then made a soft popping sound with his mouth. "Pop!" he said clearly. Lily's eyes widened. He repeated it. "Pop!" Then, slowly, he offered the block to her. She hesitated, then took it. David watched from the hallway, his heart in his throat. He couldn't step in. He knew this was sacred territory now, but he couldn't tear himself away either. Caleb pointed to his lips and said it again. "Pop?" Lily blinked, her lips parted slightly. "Try it," Caleb whispered. "You can." Lily opened her mouth. "Puh," she managed, almost soundlessly. Tears welled in David's eyes. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe. "Puh." "Pop," Lily whispered, like it hurt to form the word, but also like she wanted to say it again, just to feel it in her mouth. Caleb's face lit up like Christmas morning. "You did it," he said joyfully. "You said it." Lily smiled, a real one, small and fragile and radiant. It was the first time in nearly 2 months her father had seen her smile. Downstairs, Betty and David sat in the silence of the formal sitting room. He handed her a glass of water, but she didn't take a sip. Her eyes remained on him. "Your daughter," she said after a long moment, "has been through something. I can see it." David nodded slowly. She lost her voice. "Doctors don't know why." "Sometimes silence isn't a condition," Betty said gently. "It's a reaction." He looked down, his throat tight. "To what?" "To pain," she said simply. He clenched the armrest. "She's been through a lot. I haven't always been what she needed, but I'm trying now." Betty's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Trying's a start, but you've got a long road ahead, Mr. Carter." "I know." Upstairs, Caleb rushed into the hallway. "She said a word!" he shouted triumphantly. "She really did." David jumped to his feet. She did? She said, 'Pop,'" he beamed. "We were playing with blocks and I said it and she copied me." Betty smiled, slow and proud. "That girl's got more fight in her than most adults I know." David looked up the staircase, his chest full. "Can they come back tomorrow?" "Depends," Betty said, rising. "You gonna treat them like staff or like people?" David met her eyes. "Like family. Then we'll be here at noon." As they left, David stood by the front door, watching the 3 boys pile into Betty's car. Caleb turned around at the last second and waved. Lily, from behind the curtain in the foyer, waved back. 1 syllable, 1 smile, 1 wave. The first, cracks in the silence, the first sound of trust. And David Carter, a man who could predict tech markets 3 years in advance, had never been more uncertain or more hopeful about what tomorrow might bring. By the end of the week, the Carter estate had become strangely livelier. The once muted halls echoed with footsteps that weren't always familiar, and the silence that had haunted the walls began to feel interrupted. David watched it unfold from a cautious distance, still unsure how to step in, yet unable to pull away. It was Lily who led the shift, unknowingly. And it was the boys. Ethan with his sharp focus, Logan with his cheerful banter, and Caleb with his unwavering gentleness, who opened the first doors. It started with a schedule, one not written by any therapist but instinctively followed. Mornings became their language-building sessions. Logan brought boxes from home and cut them into makeshift cards with pictures he and Lily would draw together. Trees, cats, food, even made-up creatures with wings and wheels. He'd hold up a card, say the word, then wait patiently as Lily studied his mouth and tried her best to shape the same sound. Tree, he said one morning, holding up a shaky crayon sketch. Lily tilted her head. Her mouth opened slightly. T-re. David held his breath from the hallway, heart thudding. Her voice was still soft, but it was there. Boom! Logan clapped and grinned. That's it. That's so it. In the afternoon, Ethan would sit beside her in the study, flipping through picture books and pausing to let Lily tap on the images. He noticed that she liked patterns, rhythms. When she tapped a picture of a cat, she'd tap twice. When she pointed to a sun, she'd draw a slow circle on the page. She likes the structure, Ethan told David one evening, wiping ink smudges from his fingers. It's like music, predictable. David blinked, stunned by the observation. She used to fall asleep to classical music, he murmured. Maybe it's still inside her. Then maybe she needs to hear it again, Ethan shrugged, wise beyond his years. That night, David pulled out an old record player from the back of his office closet. He hadn't used it in years, hadn't even thought of it, but he placed the needle gently on a worn vinyl of Debussy's Clair de Lune, one of Eleanor's favorites. As the first notes filled the room, he watched from the doorway. Lily didn't say a word, but she turned her head. Her lips moved. A soft hum escaped her. It wasn't a word. It wasn't even clear, but it was something. David closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the sound. Caleb, always the quietest of the three, took a different approach. He didn't try to get Lily to speak. Instead, he sat next to her, content to be silent with her. They built Lego towers together. They painted pebbles in the garden. They watched clouds from the window. And slowly, in Caleb's presence, Lily began to hum more. She even laughed once, a startled giggle when their tower collapsed and blocks scattered across the rug. Betty noticed. She didn't say much at first, but one day, as she carried a tray of snacks to the sunroom, she paused beside David. She trusts them, she said gently. David nodded, his voice husky. I'm starting to trust them too. Betty's eyes softened, but there was still steel in her tone. Don't waste it. He met her gaze. I won't. One evening, as the autumn air turned crisp, David invited them all to stay for dinner. It was awkward at first. His chef had never cooked for kids who didn't like truffle oil or foie gras. But Ethan requested spaghetti, and Logan asked for garlic bread, and Caleb shyly requested chocolate milk. They sat around the massive dining table, the boys joking, Lily giggling behind her hand, and David. David laughed for the first time in months. Not politely, not carefully. It felt human. It felt right. After dinner, Lily climbed into her father's lap with a book, something she hadn't done since the spring. David didn't know if it was because of the music or the boys, or simply time, but he didn't care. He wrapped his arms around her and read aloud. Midway through the story, she tapped the page. "Bird," she whispered. He stopped reading. "What did you say, baby?" She pointed again. "Bird." His voice cracked. "Yes, that's right." She leaned her head against his chest. That night, after the boys had left and the house fell into a sleepy hush, David sat in his study with Tom, sipping a glass of scotch. "Something's changing," David said quietly. Tom nodded. "She's healing." David stared into the fire. "So am I." From down the hall came a soft sound, a laugh, Lily's. David closed his eyes. For the first time in a long while, he believed they were going to be okay. The sun fell lazily through the windows of the Carter estate the next afternoon, warming the hardwood floors of the reading room where Lily sat between Ethan and Caleb, their heads bowed over a puzzle of sea creatures. Logan sprawled on his stomach nearby, sketching rough shapes of rockets and stars, pausing every few seconds to glance at Lily's reactions. She was smiling now, smiling often, and the change in her had not gone unnoticed. David stood just outside the doorway, one hand resting against the cool marble frame, the other loosely holding a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. Every few minutes, he stole a glance at her. The tilt of her head, the ease in her expression. She was no longer the hollow-eyed girl who flinched from the world. There was color in her cheeks now. There was music in the way she moved. Betty approached quietly behind him. "She's waking up," she said gently, as if raising her voice might shatter the moment. David didn't look at her. "I see that." Betty hesitated. "And the boys. I think you know by now, they've been through things, hard things." He turned, meeting her eyes. "I assumed as much." "They lost their mother 2 years ago," Betty said, her voice steady but deeply sorrowful. "Angela, my daughter, brightest woman I ever knew, worked 2 jobs, loved fiercely, had plans, and then one day, gone. Car accident. No insurance, no safety net, nothing but me and a whole world of grief." David's breath caught. "They were supposed to crumble," Betty continued. "Everyone thought they would. Poor kids, barely eating, but they didn't. They became stronger, each one in their own way." He looked back at them. "I can see that." Betty stepped beside him, lowering her voice. "You know, I used to work for your family." David's brow furrowed. "You did?" "Back when your mother ran the Carter Foundation," she said with a quiet bitterness. "I was an assistant. Not a glamorous role, but I believed in the mission. I believed in her." David tried to recall. He remembered the glossy events, the high society galas, the constant stream of staff who came and went. "She let me go after my daughter got pregnant," Betty said, crossing her arms. "Said it wouldn't look right, reflecting on the Carter brand. I begged her. I cried. She wouldn't budge." David's jaw clenched. "I never knew." "I didn't expect you to," Betty said. "You were still in college, building your empire. But I remember you, quiet, thoughtful, always standing off to the side like you didn't quite belong to their world." He swallowed hard. "I don't tell you this to guilt you," Betty said, softening. "But I want you to understand why I didn't come knocking when things fell apart. Why I didn't ask for help." David nodded, eyes flicking back to the boys. "Because you didn't believe anyone would offer it." "Exactly!" Silence stretched between them for a long moment. Then David said, almost reverently, "They saved her, Betty. I didn't think anyone could reach Lily again, but your grandsons did. I don't know how to repay that." "You don't," she replied. "You honor it." Later that evening, over dinner, Ethan asked a question that froze the room. "Mr. Carter, what happened to Lily's mom?" David's fork paused halfway to his plate. His eyes met Lily's, and her expression had changed. Tense, uncertain, the shadows returning to her small features. He set his fork down slowly. "That's a long story," he said carefully. Lily reached for his hand under the table, squeezing tightly. He covered her hand with his, steadying himself. "She left us when Lily was 4, David began, his voice low and strained. "We were already struggling. Lily was different even then, quiet, sensitive. Her mother, Rachel, she didn't know how to deal with it. Said she felt trapped. Said I worked too much. One day, she just packed her things and vanished." Logan stared at him. "She left without saying goodbye?" David nodded. Caleb, silent until now, asked softly, "Do you miss her?" David took a deep breath. "I miss who I thought she was, but no. I don't miss the pain she left behind." Lily's fingers tightened in his, and when David looked down, she was mouthing something. "Sa-fi," she whispered. Ethan leaned in. "What did she say?" David's eyes brimmed with tears. "She said, 'Safe.'" A wave of stillness fell over the table. Even the boys didn't speak for a beat. Then Logan, bless his unfiltered heart, grinned. "That's the best thing I've heard all day." The tension broke like ice in spring. Laughter returned. And that night, David tucked Lily in with a gentleness that surprised even himself. As he turned off the light, she whispered again, her voice almost a breath. "Thank you." David knelt beside her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "No, baby, thank you." And outside her window, as the stars blinked awake over Atlanta, David Carter understood something he never had before. He was no longer just a billionaire CEO. He was a father reclaiming what mattered most, piece by fragile piece. The next morning, the Carter estate awoke to a new kind of rhythm. No more sterile silences or impersonal agendas. Instead, laughter echoed faintly down the marble halls. The scent of pancakes, burnt around the edges but made with care, wafted in from the kitchen where Logan, donning an oversized apron, tried flipping them with dramatic flair. Lily giggled quietly from her stool, her chin barely reaching the counter, her eyes bright with anticipation. Caleb stood beside her, cracking eggs with laser focus. Ethan supervised with the solemnity of a general on a battlefield. David watched from the doorway, arms crossed, lips twitching at the edges. For years, his mornings had begun with business briefings and investment reports. Now, they started with spilled batter and boyish mischief. He'd never felt more grounded. Tom, his loyal driver and right hand, stepped in holding a tablet. "Morning, sir. I pushed back your 10 o'clock to Thursday. Also, the Zurich call is moved to next week. You've got breathing room for once." David raised a brow. "You did all that without me asking?" Tom grinned. "Figured you'd want to spend the morning here, and, frankly, sir, it's good to see you in sweatpants." David smirked. "I own 6 companies, Tom. Sweatpants shouldn't undo my legacy." "Maybe not your legacy, but definitely your image," Tom quipped, then glanced toward the children. "They seem to like you better this way." David's eyes returned to Lily, her smile wide as Logan presented a pancake shaped vaguely like a heart. "Yeah. I think I like me better this way, too." After breakfast, the boys helped clear the table, their movements instinctive, an unspoken routine built from necessity. They didn't need reminders, didn't wait to be told. They moved with the grace of kids who'd had to grow up too soon. David watched, heart heavy with the realization that their self-sufficiency was rooted in survival, not structure. Later, in the garden, David found Lily beneath the elm tree, brushing petals into rows on the ground. Caleb sat beside her, drawing swirls in the dirt with a stick. Logan and Ethan were playing tag around the fountain. David approached slowly. "Can I join you?" Lily glanced up. Then, with an almost imperceptible nod, she scooted over. Caleb wordlessly offered David the stick. "Thank you," he said softly, kneeling down. "What are we making?" "Paths," Lily whispered. Her voice was faint but clear. "For bees." David blinked. "Bees?" "They get lost," Caleb explained matter-of-factly. "But Lily says flowers help guide them home." David nodded slowly, then drew a winding trail next to hers. "Then let's make them the best path they've ever seen." They worked in peaceful silence for a while, David rediscovering the quiet joy of simplicity. When he looked up, Betty was standing on the patio, watching with folded arms and a knowing expression. That afternoon, David sat in his study, a legal folder open in front of him. For the first time in years, his desk was cluttered, not with business reports but with crayon drawings, half-eaten apple slices, and a mug that read "Number 1 Dad" in bold, childish lettering. He didn't remember buying it. Betty entered without knocking. "I'm not interrupting, am I?" "Not unless you're here to talk stock options." Betty sat across from him, folding her hands. "I spoke to Lily's speech therapist." David leaned forward. "And?" "She's amazed by the progress," Betty said, her voice laced with pride. She thinks the boy's presence, especially Caleb's calmness, is creating a safe emotional context for Lily. David exhaled deeply. So this isn't just coincidence. No, Betty said firmly. It's connection. He stared down at Lily's latest drawing, a lopsided house with 4 stick figures and a very big sun. I've built empires, Betty, he said, voice thick. But this is the first time I feel like I'm building something that matters. Betty smiled. Then maybe it's time to change how your empire looks. David looked up. I want to start a foundation. Betty blinked. A foundation? For children like Lily, he continued. Neurodivergent, overlooked, misunderstood, and I want you to run it. She stared at him, stunned. David? I mean it, he said, his tone unwavering. You've raised those boys with nothing but grit and grace. You kept them fed, educated, kind. You know what families need better than anyone I've ever hired. Betty's voice faltered. Why me? Because you've already done the work. I'm just finally learning what it means. The room grew quiet. Then Betty stood, eyes misty. All right then, let's make something beautiful. That night, as the house fell into a hush, David stood outside Lily's room. She was fast asleep, clutching her plush bunny, a faint smile on her lips. Behind him, Ethan appeared in the hallway, barefoot and hesitant. Can I ask something? David turned. Of course. Are we staying? David didn't hesitate. If you want to. Ethan nodded, eyes glistening. We want to. David knelt, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. Then this is your home now. The boy didn't say anything. He just hugged him, quietly, fiercely, and David held on. Tomorrow, the world would call. But tonight, he was exactly where he needed to be. The Carter dining room had never hosted a meal like this. Gone were the meticulously curated centerpieces and polished silver trays served by silent staff. Tonight, the long oak table was covered in mismatched bowls of mashed potatoes, paper napkins, chicken tenders that had come straight from the air fryer, and a chipped pitcher filled with pink lemonade. It was chaotic, imperfect, and, most surprisingly, warm. David sat at the head of the table, still in his Oxford shirt, but with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. Across from him, Betty passed a bowl of green beans to Logan, who looked skeptical but accepted them anyway. Caleb and Lily sat side by side, both quietly focused on their food. Ethan was telling a story about a pigeon that had chased them down at the gas station, his arms flailing with dramatic flair. The entire table erupted in laughter. David laughed too, not politely, genuinely. It was Betty who brought the room back to stillness. She cleared her throat gently, her tone shifting. There's something I've been meaning to share, she said, and I think it's time. The boys quieted, their expressions curious. David leaned forward. Go ahead. Betty's eyes softened. I used to work in Buckhead, in a big house with marble floors and antique rugs you weren't allowed to walk on unless you took your shoes off. Logan snorted. Sounds like here. Exactly, she said with a smirk. I was a housekeeper for a woman named Evelyn Carter. David's smile faded. She was your mother. The room went still. David stared at her. You worked for my family? Betty nodded, the truth sitting between them like an uninvited guest. It was over 30 years ago. I was 19, just trying to make enough to finish school. Your mother didn't like that I talked too much with the other staff. She especially didn't like that my son, Marcus, became close friends with your little brother, Matthew. David's chest tightened. He remembered Matthew. He remembered Marcus too, vaguely. A boy with an easy smile and a natural way of drawing people in. She fired me without warning, Betty continued, her voice firm but never cruel. Told me I didn't belong, that our kind got too comfortable if we weren't reminded of our place. Ethan looked down, his appetite gone. Lily leaned into Caleb, instinctively sensing the tension. David's face was pale. "I didn't know." "You were just a boy," Betty said gently. "But your brother? He cried for days after we left. My Marcus never forgot." Logan spoke up. "Is that why you didn't want to come here at first?" Betty met his eyes. "It's why I didn't trust what a rich man would want with you three and Lily." "And now?" Ethan asked quietly. She looked at David. "Now I see a man trying to rewrite a legacy. Not for show, for love." David's throat tightened. "I'm sorry for what my family did to you." Betty's smile was faint but forgiving. "You didn't do it, David. But what you do next, that's what matters." The room was silent for a moment longer. Then Logan cleared his throat. "Can I be excused?" he said. "Because this conversation's giving me a lot of feelings I don't understand yet." The entire table chuckled, relieved. And David nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "Go easy on yourself. We're all learning." After dinner, David stepped out onto the back porch. The sky was painted in shades of twilight, and the hum of crickets filled the air. Betty joined him a moment later, arms folded. "You didn't have to tell that story tonight," David said, staring out into the dark. "No," she replied, "but they deserve to know the truth, and so did you." He nodded slowly. "I've spent my whole life thinking legacy was about power. Now I'm starting to realize it's about healing." Betty smiled. "Then you've already changed more than your mother ever did." Inside the house, Caleb helped Lily brush her teeth, humming gently to her. Logan and Ethan debated over who would get the last granola bar in the pantry. Betty's story had shifted something, but it hadn't broken them. It had brought them closer. As David stood beneath the stars, he felt it in his bones. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was becoming a home. The rain arrived just before sunset, soft at first, then heavy and insistent, drumming on the windows of the Carter estate. Inside, the boys sat cross-legged on the living room rug, helping Lily build a puzzle of sea creatures. Betty watched from the armchair, knitting in rhythm with the storm. David stood at the window, arms crossed, eyes distant. He hadn't been able to focus all day. Because today marked something new, something uncertain. The doorbell rang. He turned sharply, heartbeat rising. Betty looked up, catching the change in his expression. Logan started to rise, but David held up a hand. "I've got it," he said quietly. The front hallway felt longer than usual. Each step echoed with anticipation. When he opened the door, there she was. Angela, soaked from the rain, her curls stuck to her cheeks. A duffel bag hung from her shoulder, and her jeans were streaked with mud, but her eyes, deep brown and weary, were unmistakably hers. They hadn't changed. "Hi, David," she said, voice soft, nearly swallowed by the rain. He didn't respond right away. His eyes searched hers for some kind of sign. Remorse, anger, confusion. But all he saw was exhaustion, and something else. Hope. "Come in," he said at last, stepping aside. Angela stepped over the threshold cautiously, as if expecting the walls to collapse around her. She looked thinner than he remembered, more worn down. Life had clearly not been kind to her, and yet there was still something fierce in her posture, an ember that refused to die out. Betty appeared in the hallway, followed by Ethan, who froze at the sight of his mother. "Mom?" he breathed. Angela's face crumpled as she dropped her bag. "Ethan!" He ran to her, arms flung wide, and she collapsed to her knees, holding him like she might never let go. Her sobs were muffled against his shoulder, her body trembling with both joy and regret. Logan appeared next, wide-eyed, hesitant. Caleb peeked from behind Betty's leg, fingers clutching tightly. Angela opened her arms to them. "Please," she whispered, "I missed you so much." Logan walked forward slowly, then broke into a run, wrapping his arms around her neck. Caleb hesitated for just a breath longer, then followed, burying his face into her side. The reunion was raw and wordless, and David stepped back, giving them space. Betty rested a hand on his arm. "Let them have this," she murmured. "They need it," and they did. But later, when the boys were settled upstairs, curled around their mother like anchors, David and Angela sat at the long kitchen table, alone with years of silence between them. "I never thought I'd see you again," David admitted quietly. Angela's hands were wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. "I wasn't sure I'd make it back." "You left them," he said, not as an accusation, but as a wound still unhealed. "I didn't want to," she replied, voice shaking. "But back then, I couldn't take care of them, not with everything spiraling. My health, the debts. I thought they'd be better off without me." David swallowed hard. "They weren't, but they survived. They're stronger than I've ever seen anyone." Angela's eyes glistened. "Because of you?" "No," he said honestly. "Because of each other. And because of Lily." Angela blinked. "Lily?" David nodded slowly. "She's my daughter, 7 years old, nonverbal, but she connected with your boys in a way no one else has. They changed her life." Angela exhaled, almost in disbelief. "I didn't know." "There's a lot we don't know," he replied, "but we can fix that." She hesitated, biting her lower lip. "Are you going to fight me? For custody?" David shook his head. "No, that's not what this is about. You're their mother. I would never take them from you, but they're part of Lily's world now, and she's part of theirs." Angela looked down, her voice breaking. "I want to be their mom again, David. I want to stay clean. I want to show up. I don't expect anyone to forget what I did, but I need them to know I never stopped loving them." David nodded slowly. "Then stay. Not just for them. For yourself. I'm not asking you to move into the mansion, but I can help you get back on your feet. There's an open position at the foundation. Outreach work. You'd be amazing at it." Angela stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because they still look at the door hoping you'll walk through," he said simply. "And today, you did." The kitchen filled with the distant sound of Caleb's laughter echoing from upstairs. Angela smiled weakly. "I'll take the job," she whispered, "but only if I earn it." David extended a hand. "Then let's rebuild. Together." Their handshake was firm, but their eyes held something gentler, an understanding that while the past couldn't be changed, the future was still unwritten. And just upstairs, the three boys slept soundly for the first time in a long time, held in the arms of the woman they never stopped loving. The next morning arrived draped in golden light. It filtered softly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Carter estate, warming the breakfast table where Lily sat, methodically arranging her fruit slices by color. Ethan was helping her count in whispers, his voice calm and patient. Caleb and Logan were having a heated but playful debate over whether syrup should go on eggs. Angela stood by the stove, gently flipping pancakes, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. She looked more rested, less haunted than the night before. It was subtle, but David noticed it from across the room as he leaned against the kitchen doorway, coffee in hand. For the first time in years, his house felt like a home. Until the doorbell rang. It wasn't unusual for deliveries or business drop-ins, but something about the timing and the look that flickered across Betty's face put David on alert. He handed off his mug and moved quickly toward the foyer. When he opened the door, his breath caught in his throat. Rachel. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a loose bun, strands falling out from travel. She looked tired. No, more than tired. Worn. Not the polished woman he used to argue with across courtrooms and therapy offices. Her eyes, however, still held that same fierce intelligence, the one he both admired and feared. She stood frozen on the threshold, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "Hi," she said after a long pause. I came as soon as I heard." David stared at her for a moment before stepping aside. "Come in." She walked in slowly, cautiously, as if the house itself might reject her presence. He guided her to the sunroom, away from the kids, and closed the glass doors behind them. "You heard?" he asked, voice low. Rachel nodded. "I saw the video. Online. Lily laughing, trying to speak. It went viral on some parenting blog, and then—" "I didn't post it," David interrupted gently. "One of the therapists must have, without asking." "I'm not here to argue," Rachel said quickly, holding up a hand. I needed to see her. Please, David. I didn't know she was getting better." David exhaled, sinking into the chair opposite her. "It's not therapy. It's the boys." Rachel blinked. "The boys?" He nodded. 3 brothers. Rough start. Living with us now. They somehow reached her. Ethan, Logan, Caleb. Especially Caleb. It's like she hears him in a way no one else could." Rachel's lips parted in awe. "She's connecting again?" "She's smiling, playing, mimicking sounds. She's not fully verbal yet, but Rachel, she's trying, on her own." Tears slipped down Rachel's cheeks, unannounced. She wiped them hastily. "I thought I was doing the right thing when I left. You were always so intense, so determined to fix her. I didn't know how to live in that." "I didn't either," David said softly. "I thought if I just worked harder, gave her everything, every expert, every machine, every breakthrough, that I could control it. But she didn't need control. She needed connection." Rachel looked down, ashamed. "I didn't recognize that either. I gave up. I ran." "You did what you thought you had to do." Rachel looked up at him then, eyes bloodshot. "Can I see her?" David hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Let me talk to her first. She's protective of her space now." He left the room and found Lily on the back patio, flipping through a picture book. Caleb sat nearby, quietly tracing words with his finger. When David explained that someone from Lily's past wanted to say hello, she paused, her expression unreadable. He waited. Then she slowly turned a page and pointed to the word, Mom. David's heart squeezed. "Not Mom," he said gently. "Rachel." Lily tilted her head. Then, after a moment, she picked up her communication board and tapped out, "She left." David swallowed. "Yes, but she wants to try again." Caleb stood, slipping his hand into Lily's. "Do you want to see her?" Lily's eyes lingered on Caleb's face, then flicked toward the patio doors. With one slow nod, she gave her answer. David led Rachel outside, every step heavy with unspoken memories. When Lily looked up, Rachel gasped. "She's taller," she whispered. "Hi, baby," Rachel said aloud, voice trembling. Lily looked at her, blank-faced, then picked up her board again. She tapped. "Are you staying?" Rachel crumpled inward at the question, tears immediately flowing. She knelt, hands shaking. "If you'll let me. I want to try, Lily. I didn't know how before, but I want to now. Please." For a long, impossibly silent moment, Lily didn't move. Then she placed the board aside, looked at Rachel, and leaned gently, deliberately, against her shoulder. Not a full hug, but something brave and intentional. Rachel sobbed openly, arms wrapping around her daughter like the world itself might fall away. David stood a few feet back, watching as the mother and daughter rediscovered a fragile thread between them. He felt the presence of the boys nearby, watching with quiet awe. A family, reshaped. Not perfect, but healing. And, as the sun moved higher in the sky, so did the sense that maybe, just maybe, this broken world had room for second chances after all. The house was quieter that evening, though it wasn't silent. There was a calm hum of life. Faint footsteps upstairs, the low murmur of the television in the den, the occasional clink of dishes from the kitchen as Betty and Angela cleaned up after dinner. Rachel had stayed for a few hours, carefully respectful of Lily's space, speaking when spoken to, never pushing, never pleading. Now, Lily sat curled on the rug of the family room between Ethan and Logan. Her head rested gently on Caleb's knee as he hummed something soft and tuneless, his fingers combing idly through her hair. She looked peaceful, and more importantly, she looked safe. David stood by the edge of the doorway, arms crossed, watching the scene with an unreadable expression. Rachel approached slowly from behind, holding a glass of water. "She didn't flinch when I touched her shoulder," she whispered, cautiously hopeful. David nodded. "She's learning to trust again." Rachel sat down on the bench by the wall. "She's lucky to have them." "She saved them too," he replied quietly, more than once. Rachel's brows furrowed. "How?" David leaned back against the doorframe, the weight of the past few months heavy on his shoulders. They were homeless, living out of a motel with their grandmother. Parents gone. Their mother came back briefly, but it was rough. Lily. She responded to them in ways she never responded to doctors, and in return, they found purpose. Rachel absorbed his words slowly, processing the gravity of them. "I was angry," she said, her voice cracking. "I told myself it was your fault, that you were too obsessed with controlling her future, but I didn't know how to be her mother either, not when I felt so helpless." David didn't say anything right away. Instead, he watched Caleb gently hand Lily her board. She took it with quiet concentration. "I know now," he said finally, "that control was never the answer. I can't force her to speak. I can't force healing. All I can do is show up, every single day." Rachel nodded solemnly. "You're a better father than I gave you credit for." "And you're still her mother," he added, glancing at her. "You deserve a place in her life, if she wants you there." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Just then, Lily tapped her board. Caleb leaned over and read aloud. "Scared. Don't want surgery." David felt his heart pause. He walked over and crouched beside her. "We don't have to talk about that now," he said gently, but Lily looked at him, then tapped again. "My way works." Rachel watched, her eyes glassy. "She's talking about the offer, the clinic in Zurich." David nodded, unsure how she even knew. The week prior, a neurology institute in Switzerland had reviewed Lily's scans and offered her a place in a cutting-edge vocal rehabilitation program. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic. The potential was real, but so were the risks. Travel, emotional setbacks, and the possibility of regression if the program failed. He had kept it quiet, uncertain how to present the option to Lily. "She must have heard me talking to Betty," Rachel said softly. David turned to his daughter. "Lily, you don't have to go. No one's going to make you." Lily tapped again. "I choose." A long pause. Then she reached over and touched Caleb's wrist. "Stay here." David felt something inside him break open, a mix of pride, heartbreak, and awe. Not just because she'd expressed herself with clarity, but because she'd made a decision on her own terms. Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. "She's right. Her way is working." Caleb looked up, his eyes shining. "She doesn't need to be fixed." David reached over and gently squeezed his shoulder. "She's already extraordinary." No one argued. They sat in a shared silence, wrapped in the weight of Lily's truth. For the first time, she wasn't the object of pity or a mystery to solve. She was the voice in the room, quiet but powerful. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed and the house had dimmed to a warm hush, David stepped out onto the back porch. Rachel followed him a moment later, arms crossed tightly against the cool air. "You did good, David," she said, breaking the silence. He looked up at the stars. "I almost lost her. Maybe I did, for a while." Rachel's voice softened. "You found her again." He turned toward her, not alone. She smiled faintly. "Do you think she'd want me to come by again next week?" David nodded. "Ask her." Rachel took a deep breath, the kind that hurts before it heals. "I will." They stood together in silence, the night sky stretching above them like a promise. The first morning after Lily made her decision to stay, the house felt subtly different. Not louder, not more chaotic, but fuller. The silence that once felt like absence now felt like peace. David stirred early, but for once it wasn't to review market reports or prep for a board call. It was to pack a lunchbox with apple slices and peanut butter crackers. Downstairs, Ethan was already dressed, organizing cereal boxes by size at the breakfast table like a miniature architect. Logan, with a pencil tucked behind one ear, was doodling comic panels in his notebook. Caleb still hadn't made an appearance, probably tangled in his blankets or refusing to change out of pajamas. David smiled softly. These small moments, once unnoticed, now felt sacred. Then came Lily, slow but purposeful steps, her hand gripping the rail as she descended. Her favorite lavender hoodie swayed slightly as she walked, her eyes alert, searching. "Morning, sweetheart," David said gently, crouching slightly to meet her at eye level. Lily blinked slowly, then raised her board. "School today?" He nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yes, but not the same one. This one's special. It's called Haven Ridge. Small class sizes. Therapy built into the day. You'll never be alone." She tilted her head. "Ethan, Logan, Caleb?" "They'll come too," David replied. "Today, it's just you and me. We'll visit. You decide if it feels right." She tapped once more, slower this time. "Can we drive with music?" David's chest tightened. "Any playlist you want." They drove through Midtown Atlanta, the early sunlight streaming through buildings like an invitation. David played one of Lily's old favorites, gentle acoustic tracks with soft piano, the kind she used to hum before the silence began. She tapped her fingers quietly against the window, her face calm. Haven Ridge was nestled in a tree-lined corner of the city, a restored historic mansion repurposed into a therapeutic learning space. No bright fluorescent lights, no cold hallways. Just warm wood floors, colorful rugs, and smiling faces. They were greeted at the door by Principal Herrera, a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and an instinct for reading children before they spoke. "You must be Lily," she said with a warm nod, "and you must be David. She's even more radiant than your emails described." David smiled. "She's everything." Lily stayed close, eyes darting, but not afraid. Herrera motioned them inside. "Would you like to meet another student? Her name's Natalie. She's 10, loves sketching and reading aloud, though she mostly signs." Lily hesitated, then nodded. Natalie was waiting in a sunny room with beanbags and a wall covered in butterflies. She wore overalls and had a bright yellow headband holding back a mop of curls. When she saw Lily, she smiled, then quickly signed, "Hi, your hoodie is cool." Lily tilted her head. Her lips parted slightly. Then she raised her board. "Hi, your headband is cool." Natalie laughed silently, a hand over her mouth. The two sat side by side, exchanging a mix of hand signs and board taps. Within minutes, they were coloring together, their silence threaded with mutual understanding. David watched from the hallway, Herrera beside him. "She doesn't need rescuing," Herrera said gently. "She needs space, and consistency, and someone who sees her, not her diagnosis." David nodded. "She's taught me more in 3 months than I learned in 30 years. Then you're already doing it right, Herrera said. When it was time to leave, Lily clutched her board with both hands and typed a single line. I want to come back. David knelt beside her. Then we'll come back tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. She smiled, just a little, and for David, it was everything. That evening, the boys celebrated Lily's first school visit with a spaghetti dinner they insisted on helping make. Logan grated too much cheese, Caleb got flour on his sleeves, and Ethan meticulously arranged garlic bread in the shape of the word Lily. Rachel stopped by with a gift, 4 sketchbooks, 1 for each child. Lily accepted hers with a nod, tapping "thank you" on her board. I'd like to keep seeing her, Rachel said to David privately after dinner. Even if it's just once a week. I'm not asking to move back in, I want to be there, when she's ready. David studied her carefully. The bitterness, once etched into every word between them, had faded. In its place was something resembling humility. She made her choice, he said, but it's her decision to keep making. I won't stop her. Rachel nodded slowly, blinking back emotion. Then I'll keep showing up. As the kids settled into a movie night, David stepped onto the porch. The cool air kissed his face as he leaned against the rail, letting the quiet stretch. Tom, his longtime driver and the quiet anchor of his life through it all, walked up from the driveway. Everything all right, boss? He asked. David smiled softly. She's going to be okay. Tom nodded knowingly. Took a lot to get here. David looked back through the window at his daughter surrounded by laughter, pillows, and her 3 unexpected brothers. She brought me here, he said quietly. Tom patted his shoulder. Then it's her world now. You just live in it. David laughed gently. Gladly. The auditorium buzzed with quiet anticipation. Parents whispered in the back rows, teachers adjusted cameras, and children in bright costumes lined up behind the curtain. It was the annual showcase at Haven Ridge, a celebration of progress, not perfection. A night where every child, no matter their pace or path, was given the stage. David Carter sat in the second row, arms resting nervously on his knees. Beside him sat Ethan, Logan, and Caleb, each dressed in a little tie, each radiating pride. On his other side sat Rachel, subdued but present, her eyes tracking every movement behind the velvet curtain. They were all here for Lily. Weeks had passed since her first visit. Since then, Lily had not only returned to school, she had begun to thrive. Her teachers spoke of her gentleness, her quiet but unwavering desire to connect. She still relied on her board, but her expressive signing was blossoming, as was her trust. And now, tonight, she would speak. Not because she was forced, not because of therapy, but because she wanted to. When Principal Herrera stepped onto the stage and introduced the final act, Lily Carter, with Ethan, Logan, and Caleb Green, a hush fell over the audience. Then the lights shifted, and 4 small figures took their places center stage. Ethan held a cue board he'd made himself. Welcome. Logan stood beside a keyboard, ready to cue in soft music. Caleb, never one for silence, gave the audience a little wave. And then there was Lily, calm, centered, and radiant. She wore a simple white dress with a small lavender flower at the collar. Around her neck hung the same wooden heart necklace David had gifted her years ago, the one she had kept through all the silence, all the pain. Logan played a soft melody, the kind you'd hear on a spring morning just before sunrise. Lily stepped forward. Her hands moved first, signing words as Caleb translated aloud, his voice careful and deliberate. My name is Lily Carter. I used to be quiet because I was scared, but then I met some boys who made me laugh, and a man who listened without making me talk. I found my voice. Caleb paused. Lily turned her face toward the crowd, and then softly, so gently it broke something open in every chest, she spoke. Thank you. Just one word. Fragile, breathy, but hers. The crowd gasped. Rachel's hands flew to her mouth. David blinked through tears. Lily looked out across the room, her eyes searching, and when they landed on her father, she smiled. He stood, stunned, a hand over his heart. The applause was thunderous, but Lily didn't flinch. She bowed gracefully, her brothers bowing beside her. Then they exited the stage, hand in hand, their silhouettes framed by the golden light behind them. Afterward, in the small courtyard outside the school, guests milled about, congratulating students and snapping pictures. David found Lily near the fountain, surrounded by her teachers. "Hey," he said softly. She looked up, her face flushed from the excitement. He knelt down and held out his hand. She placed her fingers in his. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "Not for speaking, not even for the show. I'm proud because you did it your way." She tapped her board. "You gave me space." His throat tightened. "Because you needed it. Because you deserved it." Rachel approached then, lingering at a respectful distance. Lily looked at her, then back to David, then reached for Rachel's hand too. For the first time in a long time, the three of them stood together, father, mother, daughter, not as a broken unit, but as a rebuilding one. Later that night, as the city grew quiet and the children drifted off to sleep, David sat on the back porch, looking up at a sky dusted with stars. Tom joined him, sipping a mug of coffee. "You hear her?" Tom asked. David chuckled. "I'll never forget it." "She didn't just say thank you to the audience," Tom said knowingly. "She said it to you." David leaned back. "You think I did enough?" Tom smiled. "You showed up. You stayed. You let her lead. That's more than most do." From inside the house came the soft sound of laughter, not from just one child, but four. David closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the simple beauty of it all, not the estate, not the company's rising shares, not even the applause from earlier. But that sound. Lily's voice, quiet and strong, woven now into the world she had helped rebuild. And that was everything.